Hi everyone. This video is one one that I said I was going to do. So this is kind of a follow-up as to the video I did about when I was talking about why I loved anime. This one is I'm going to be talking about my interest in Tokusatsu, which is a live-action Japanese film and television genre. I'm quite sure that Tokusatsu actually means special effects in Japanese. Um, Basically, I'll start with just talking about what it is. As I kind of said, it's a live action form of entertainment in Japan, originated in Japan, and it's basically, I think it was started on stage. It was mainly purposed of actors who, in costume. Actors in costume, but basically, I think originally the in the stage productions the audio was all just dubbed on in audio. Well, it was basically like you'd have the actors on the stage, and then they'd have recorded audio as the production was playing. And then it got adapted into film and television. Most people know of the Tokusatsu genre is for its westernized adaptations, like most commonly is Power Rangers. Power Rangers began in 1993 in the States with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and that for me was the first kids show that I really got into, because it was just unlike anything. It was just unlike anything I'd seen. Prior to knowing about Power Rangers, I was a big Disney fan. I had like nearly every Disney film on video. I had every classic as a kid, because me and my family just loved them. But then when I'd started school, this is when I started school in late 1994. And first thing I saw was some of the Power Rangers toys before I'd seen the series on Saturday morning GMTV. Because people were just bringing them to school, everyone was talking about it. And you probably might remember something that parents weren't very fond of. A lot of parents weren't very fond of the show because they said it was having a negative impact on children, like children were wanting to do a lot of play fighting and role players. One kid play one of the rangers, the other kid play as the monster or a putty, and they would play fight and it had of course a certain level of violent play for kids, but and it even, I should say, it even got banned from airing in some countries. Most notably is what's known as, it's actually got banned in New Zealand quite early, which is where it's been filmed since 2003, because I know that Disney bought the rights halfway through the production of Power Rangers Wild Force, and after that season was completed, they were on the verge of cancelling it, but then they decided to move production to New Zealand because it would be cheaper to film. So what I didn't know is I had no idea that the source material for this show and the other shows, there were some other shows that Saban did. They did, first one notably was VR Troopers, which was a similar show to Power Rangers, where the first series was very successful, and I do remember, yes, I did collect some of the toys from that show. I didn't quite see it as regularly as Power Rangers, because I think, by the time VR Troopers aired, that was shown on some weekday mornings, but as a kid I wasn't really allowed to watch television before I went to school, and it probably was on by the time I was there anyway, but I saw it every now and then. And I collected some of the toys. It had a line of action figures and vehicle playsets, because unlike Power Rangers, VR Troopers didn't feature like giant transforming robots, didn't feature anything like the Zords. They had like an arsenal of tanks and planes with missiles, so the toy line was similar, but it was different. And on the whole, I thought the series was quite good. Now, I've rewatched it since many times. Yeah, it had a good premise on the whole. The story of the character of Ryan Steele, wondering about what happened to his father that was missing for 10 years. And then in the first episode of the show, he's recruited by Professor Hart, his father's former partner, to go to his laboratory, and he explains to them that the elite villain of the show, Grimlord, has now broken through the reality barrier from another dimension called virtual reality, which is like a video game type dimension, and has broke through the reality barrier to come and conquer the real world. And he gives Ryan and his two best friends, Caitlin Starr and JB Reese, gives them access to power that he and Tyler Steele, Ryan's father, discovered. Basically, which will transform them into VR troopers, the VR troopers, so they can fight Grimlord's evil forces. Some of the strange things about the series, which I think one of the big problems with the series was that it actually was made up of two different Japanese tokusatsu series from the Metal Hero genre. One being one called Metalda, which is basically a show about a solo hero, which was the equivalent of Ryan Steele's character in the show. Because originally they were actually just going to, for that show, they were just going to have it be about a solo hero and solely just use footage from the Metalda series. But because the footage became limited, they had this idea to change the plot from being just one hero to three heroes. So they took footage from a series called Dimensional Warrior Spielbahn. Well, that's what it translates as in English. The Spielbahn series consisted of the two other hero characters, and because of this, there were no actual scenes or no actual Japanese footage of the characters fighting all together in suit form, in trooper form. And that's one of the things, because the footage was so limited, a lot of the scenes were repeated in the episodes. A lot of the scenes were just sometimes exactly the same. I mean, similar things happened in Power Rangers, like the scenes with some of the Zord scenes. Like every time the Zords would be summoned, you'd see the Tyrannosaurus coming out the ground, Pterodactyl coming out the volcano, the saber-toothed tiger racing along, or the Triceratops then just coming in, and the Mastodon travelling through the Ice Age into Season 1. But that footage was also reused mostly in Super Sentai as well as the scene with the Dragon Zord coming up from the sea. And then, so after the first series, I think VR Troopers sort of lost some interest. The first series was very successful, and I think the toys sold really well, and they were some pretty good toys. They were different to the toys from Power Rangers, for example. They were just simple, action figures of the troopers. There was also troopers where you could have the figure in civilian form, and you could actually just clip the armor onto them. So there was a second series of VR Troopers, which consisted of new footage from a different show. I think it was Shida, Uchikechi Shida, that's it. Which I have seen bits of. I've actually got a Shida and Super Sentai Shida and Gokaija Sentai team-up film, which was actually really good. I purchased it in San Francisco a few years ago when I was out there. But after the second series, the show actually got cancelled before it got a proper ending. It was a shame because they were getting to a really good climax in the story, but prior to it finishing, the show got cancelled. One of the reasons being that it wasn't attracting as many viewers, also that they were seriously running out of footage that was available for them to use. This is because in a lot of cases, the tokusatsu, a lot of the tokusatsu material is more relevant for an older audience by westernized standards, even though they still cast a lot of their shows in Japan, like Super Sentai, as children's shows, but they seem to have standards there that they can show more violent things to children, and there's footage of in a lot of Tokusatsu series of people being crushed under buildings, or actually lots of quite fairly bloodthirsty scenes, particularly in I've watched a lot of Super Sentai because I collect the series now, because they've been released on DVD by Shout Factory in the States. So yeah, I've ordered some of them over, and a lot of the footage that's not seen in Power Rangers is partly because they don't want to have too visible footage of lots of Japanese citizens running around in the city, when primarily Power Rangers on the other shows are supposed to take place in America. But also, yeah, a lot of it's frowned upon in by stateside companies, and the adaptations that we have, a lot of them are primarily aimed at children, more or less, really just to market toys. Yeah, so that was VR Troopers, and then the next one being Masked Rider, which actually I saw that, but we were introduced to the character of the Masked Rider before that series actually aired, because he was introduced in the first opening 3-parter of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 3, where the Rangers had to go to his planet Edenoid to support him to fight off Count Dregon, the lead villain in that series. From what I'm aware, is the premise of the Masked Rider show was to carry on directly from where that 3-parter left off, but there were changes made to it at the last minute. I think mostly because at the time Power Rangers was starting to drop in ratings, so to mark it as a new show, they made changes to Masked Rider, so as to not. They pretty much removed the references to Power Rangers, plus adding this comedic character in of a character called Furbus, which wasn't from the series that it was based on, Kamen Rider Black RX, and I'm a huge Kamen Rider fan. I've got lots of box sets. I've got a couple of Kamen Rider figures. They are quite hard to get hold of, but yeah, I have got quite a few Kamen Rider box sets. Some of which I've ordered online, and some of which I got from America when I went out there. So yeah, it wasn't always a good series. One thing, the issue that VR Troopers had that this one didn't have was this footage wasn't quite as repetitive. I'm quite aware that I think pretty much all of the footage in suit form was from the Japanese material. I don't recall them actually shooting any original footage when he's in hero form fighting off the monsters, which in some ways is better because it does look generally more realistic, and most of the time they're able to blend the original footage and the Japanese footage in quite well. As the overall premise of that series was that the character Dex has to leave his planet because Count Dragon, who's conquered his planet, who's the lead villain, and also his uncle, plans to take his minions to Earth to enslave Earth, and the only hero who's capable of stopping them is the Masked Rider. And so his grandfather, King Lexium, has to send him to Earth. And then when he gets down to Earth, he's adopted by a family which has 2 other adopted children, Molly and Albie, and which is a very nice touch to the show, that they had a family, who had adopted 2 children, and then after Dex is welcomed into the family, they adopt him to help him accustom to ways on Earth, because being a humanoid alien, he really struggles at first to accustom to the ways of the everyday human. So yeah, I did enjoy the series. Once more, it was another one that there was a final episode which brought a good end to the story. The episode being of the invasion of Leewood, which I haven't watched all of Black RX yet, but I understand I think it's a 2-parter in the original material, and And that episode I've seen and heard that has some of the most noticeable sort of flare-ups and mistakes of scenes of Japanese sort of people alongside the heroes where they shouldn't be, which was a bit confusing to some fans in the States and here. So overall, I did enjoy it. You know, I was particularly excited to hear it, considering I'd seen him in Power Rangers at the time. Of course, something that did confuse the fans after this was we were never told that just because those changes were made to the show, that we were never confirmed that it didn't take place in the same universe as Power Rangers. You know, as far as we were concerned, it did. Because he was introduced in Power Rangers, and even though the references to Power Rangers were removed, some questions need to be answered. Like, you know, supposedly at the same point in the Power Rangers timeline, you had Rita and Zed enslaving the Earth, and yet Count Dragon was also enslaving Earth. And another thing is, during the Alien Ranger saga in Power Rangers Season 3, one of the kids, Kid Rocky, the second Red Ranger, actually does mention Evil at one point, but we don't really get any further connections there. And I collected nearly all the Masked Rider toys, because I grew to really like the series. I had a Magno, which was like his talking car, which he drove, and also had a mind of her own. She could dig tunnels. And also, I had Combat Chopper, which was his motorcycle, which had like a bird head on it that spoke. And that character was actually voiced by Jason Nardi, who played Skull in Power Rangers. So a nice little reference there. And the toys were good. There were like pullback racers with Combat Choppers. I had the Magno. I had the Ecto Accelerator, which is the equivalent of a Morpher, which was Dex's thing that he used to transform into Masked Rider. I had several of the monster figures. I had all the Masked Rider figures. On the whole, I enjoyed it. It wasn't as successful as Power Rangers, but then again, none of the others really were. There were finally, I say in the Saban, the final attempt to create another westernized Tokusatsu series was Beetleborgs. First it began with Big Bad Beetleborgs and then Beetleborgs Metallics. Beetleborgs basically, for a time I heard in the States that the ratings for Beetleborgs got higher than Power Rangers because it was a big appeal to the children, because the children were superheroes themselves. So the premise of this series is that there's 3 children, Joe, her big brother Drew, and the oldest of the kids, which is Roland. And they are big fans of this cartoon, of this comic strip, this very popular comic about superheroes called The Big Bad Beetleborgs. And what happens is you have the equivalent of the Bulk and Skull in the series called Trip and Van, which are these 2 rich kids which are constantly making fun and bullying the 3 main protagonists, and they get dared to go into this haunted house together. So what happens is they go into this haunted house and they end up exploring, and they come across this pipe organ, and what happens is they decide just to try it out, and and coincidentally it frees this character called Flabber, who is a phasm. So as a reward for busting him out the pipe organ, he agrees to grant them a wish. And they wish to become the Beetleborgs. It's a good series. Now, leading on to the next part, unfortunately, what happens is that after Flabber grants them their wish, the villains in the comic book, the Magnabors, which I know the leader was Vaxor, Noxic, Vaxor, then you had the female Magnabor, which was Jara, you had Noxic, and Titrus. They're freed, and they come into the real world, so then the Beetleborgs have to fight the comic book enemies as well. So, that was basically the first part of the series. Now, Yeah, and like Power Rangers and Master Rider VR Troopers, it did also have its toy line of 6-inch figures. You could get the Beetle Bonder, which was their sort of morpher equivalent, which they basically just summoned by putting their hands down, shouting Beetle Bonder, holding up, saying Beetle Blast. And the transformation sequence was quite. And the transformation sequence was quite a cheap sort of transforming sequence, but given the fact that these are supposed to be comic book characters, it fit quite nicely because they basically shows the kids in 2-dimensional form, and then there's the comic book and the page turning to find them in their armor, and then they materialize into 3-dimensional form, and then they step forward in their armored forms, and then that's it. They're transformed to Beetleborgs. And then at some point halfway through the first season, there's also the introduction of a character called the White Blaster Beetleborg for a particular story arc called The Curse of the Shadowborg, which which was a story which was my favourite part of the entire show. I actually had that video special when it was released. You could buy the sort of an edited version on video, which basically was just certain bits of episodes basically cut down to make sort of a straight-to-video movie. Yeah, and I watched that a lot because it was my favourite part. Basically what happens is there's an evil Beetleborg created who's not from the comic books to rival the Beetleborgs, and he steals the Beetleborg's powers, and the character of and then they comes in this new Beetleborg called the White Blaster Beetleborg, because the kids go to get help from the comic book creator, Art Fortunes, who created the Beetleborg. So he draws up this new Beetleborg, the White Blaster Beetleborg, and then they recruit this new kid called Josh, who's the new kid in town. He comes in at the beginning of the story arc. He's granted the power of the White Borg. Yeah, he gets in his first battle with the Shadowborg. He gets their powers back, and throughout just fights alongside the team until the end of the story arc. But the reason I think why they couldn't keep him was apparently because the show that footage was taken from was a show from another show from the Metal Hero called Bee Fighter. Yeah, Kabuto Beetle Fighter, and that show. And that character, I think, was actually a villain, but didn't have that much. Only had very little screen time in the Bee Fighter series, the White Blaster Beetleborg. So basically, what happens? They got the costume and had to shoot a lot of original footage for the Beetleborg series, and and of course it would cost them a lot of money to have to keep shooting. So the way that this was resolved was a bit similar to the storyline of the Green Candle in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1, of how they wrote Tommy out when they ran out of the Zyuranger footage of the Green Ranger. Was that basically because the White Borg's powers were created because of the Shadowborg meant that the powers were connected. So once the Shadowborg is destroyed, then the White Beetleborg's powers will go with him, and that's basically what happens. And yeah, so after that, it finds out the blue Beetleborg, Drew, also has unlocked the powers of a armored mode, which he called Mega Blue, which is basically like the equivalent of the Battleizers in Power Rangers, and it gives him like sort of beetle wings on his back in armor, and adjusts the powers on his weapon called the Thunder Slinger. And then there was another strange thing that occurred near towards the end of Season 1, I think, was where the character Joe, her actress had to leave the show, I think, due to partly unknown reasons, but I think it's because she had been approached to do other projects. Because the original actress, I think her name was Shannon Changla. she soon appeared in the first straight-to-video Casper film called Casper: A Spirited Beginning, which was also a Saban project, but she left suddenly. She left the Beetleborgs show very suddenly, so this had to be explained quite quickly because they very quickly had to recast and someone else to play the part. And the way this was explained was quite silly. The monsters in the haunted house, because you see the supporting cast in the show, in the haunted house, in Flabber's house, are a cast of kiddified, jokey Halloween type characters. They had basically been playing around with Flabber's spell book, and they accidentally cast this spell on Jo, which changes her appearance and her voice completely. And the way that this was covered over, the way that this was basically solved was that Flabber could cast a spell on her, so that to Jo and Roland and everyone that knew her as the Red Beetleborg would see her as her new self, but people who didn't know that she was a Beetleborg, people who just knew her as a kid in her normal life, would see her as her old self. And yeah, that's pretty much how that was explained. So that was kind of the premise of the first series, and and then when you get to the end part, which is a good storyline as well, they basically, what happens is the Beetleborgs defeat the Magnibors after battling with a combined version of all the comic book monsters they fought in the past year. But what the hidden flaw is that once he's destroyed, then all the other creatures from the comic book reality will return to the comic books as well. And that's what happens, and then Flabber tells them that because their job is done, they have to give up their powers. But then we get into the introduction of the new villains and the plot for Season 2, which is Beetleborgs Metallics. Basically, what happened is there was this villain called Mucus, which Vaxor summoned at the end, at the end of the first series, to basically help defeat the Beetleborgs, because they felt that he was convinced he could beat them because he wasn't from the comics. He was a creation. He wasn't a creation for any comic books, just a powerful evil warrior. And basically he is summoned to defeat the Beetleborgs, but given the fact that Nucus is actually more powerful than the Magnibors, he seeks it in his mind he can get them sent back to the comic books. So he devises a plan, creating this monster Borg Slayer from all the other comics, with a hidden flaw that if Borg Slayer is destroyed, basically then all the creatures, including the Magnibors, will return to the comics as well. So after that, basically, unbeknown to the Beetleborgs, they hand over their Beetle Bonders to Flabber, but then Nucus shows up, and then they have to be given back their power. They get given back their Bonders, and unfortunately, they lose the battle to him. So then after that, Nucus actually goes to find the brother of Art Fortunes, the creator of Beetleborg comics. He's called Les Fortunes, and he frees him from prison, so then Nucus has got his own cartoonist to draw his creations for him, which he can bring to life. And then what happens is Art Fortunes draws up new Beetleborgs and new vehicles, battle vehicles and weapons, which are the Beetleborgs Metallics. And so that's how it leads into Beetleborgs Metallics. And so you've got new villains, new heroes, and also just while I'm here, I'll talk a bit about the introduction of a new character called Little Ghoul, because the side characters in the show, as I said, were these sort of Halloween joke versions of Halloween characters. Like you had Count Fangula, who's a vampire. You had Frankenbeans, who was sort of a comedy version of Frankenstein's monster. You had Mums, who was a mummy, and Wolfie, who was a werewolf. Coincidentally, Wolfie is the name of my dog as well. Right, so, and then at the beginning of Beetleborgs Metallics, they're then joined by another character called Little Ghoul, who actually you'll find is the first thing you'll think of when you see her in the show is a Jawa, as in the little sand people from Star Wars, because she does have a lot of resemblance of a Jawa. Basically, yeah, she's a ghoul who lives in the cellar, and she's very easily bad-tempered. So yeah, Beetleborgs Metallics, it wasn't as good as the first series, and it probably didn't attract many viewers. But then again, I don't think the first series overall attracted that many viewers as well. Except the fact that what was very appealing to the kids was that the kids themselves were superheroes. Overall, it had some good story arcs. It was very cartoon friendly, and a lot of the stuff from the B-Fighter show was just not used because it had been too violent, and it was supposedly this is probably the most child friendly of the Tokusatsu westernized adaptations. There was two other characters introduced towards the end of the show, in a story arc with these villains called the Mantrons, a release from a lost comic drawn by Less Fortunes and Art Fortunes when they were kids. They basically find it. They release this weapon called the Nucus releases this powerful weapon called the Astro Sword, which has Astro coins that they can. Which basically, when all the coins are put in, they can summon this giant robot called Roboborg. And the storyline of the series, they summon these evil creatures called the Mantrons, also from the comic, to defeat the Beetleborgs. And basically, the first sort of big storyline for that is a battle between Nucus' side and the Beetleborgs, fighting the Mantrons to get all the Astro coins. And just at one point where I think the Beetleborgs have the Astro Sword, Nucus and the Mantrons have the Astro coins, and but then what happens by the end is that the Beetleborgs have all the Astro coins and they can summon Roboborg. He's basically like the equivalent of a Megazord in Power Rangers, except that he's kind of a living robot. And he grants them these new Mega Spectre powers, which are again sort of equivalent to Battleizers. Also, their Mega Spectre armor is actually in the original colours. So, for example, Drew is the gold Beetleborg in Beetleborgs Metallics, but when he gets his Mega Spectre armor, it's blue. The Mega Spectre armor is blue because originally he was the blue Beetleborg. Roland gets green armor, even though he's the silver Beetleborg. Yeah, the titanium Beetleborg in Beetleborgs Metallics, and then platinum purple for Joe. It's also then she has a red Beetleborg, a red Spectre armor, and he also enhances the powers on their Scepter cycles, which are these motorcycles which were drawn into the Beetleborgs Metallics comics in the second series, and they basically can summon them to ride about wherever they want. So but that, at the point, is where the series ends. Once again, like Master Rider, it kind of got an ending in its last episode with Nucus finally getting fed up with Less Fortunes' creations just failing him constantly, and Less Fortunes is constantly abused by Nucus, and he just decides to dump sticks and then go back to prison. Basically, that is the end of the show. So once again, yeah, it was a show that I enjoyed. I really did enjoy it, and I haven't really I've not seen hardly anything of the B-Fighter Japanese show, but I'd really like to watch it. So I'll have to look out for it, and I would like to watch it, yeah. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is there was also another series created by Subaraya Productions called Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, which was derived from a show called Gridman in Japan. I have actually seen some of Gridman. I've actually got a Gridman film which I really, really like. The graphics in it are good, the action scenes are good, the plot's good. But the thing was, Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad really wasn't that good, because it was very cheaply made, and most of the time I think that one was only made to cash in on the popularity of Power Rangers. Basically, it consisted of members of this big high school band. The lead in the band is a guitarist called Sam Collins, and what happens one day is he hits this. He was playing his guitar when it's plugged into his computer, because they're using a digital software to manage their music, which sucks him into the computer world, and he is basically then becomes this character which he created called Servo, which he created in his computer, in a computer game, and then coincidentally what happens at the same time is that this self-aware computer virus called Kilocarn gets in touch with seeks out the help of Sam's mortal enemy called Malcolm Frink to create computer viruses for Kilocarn to bring to life. And the thing to say about Kilocarn is, one thing that made this series stand out was the fact that Kilocarn was actually voiced by Tim Curry. So that's kind of what most people would remember the series for, and that's really the only thing to appreciate about it. I say I have enjoyed it. I saw bits of it as a kid, and I did actually have a toy of Servo. I didn't say anything about. And the only toy I also had from Beetleborgs, I only had one toy from Beetleborgs, and that was the figure of the Shadowborg. But I didn't have any of the toys from that show, and I only had a small Servo figure from Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. I was very tempted to buy a Gridman figure that I saw in San Francisco, but it was a lot of money, something like $55. It was just too much for that size of an action figure. And then throughout and then also back to Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, the other members of the band, Tanker, Amp, and Sydney, also gain access to the computer world, where they can help Sam to fight off the viruses of Servo. And what they do is they pilot these vehicles in the computer world, which can join together with Servo to form a humanoid robot, which strongly resembles Optimus Prime. If you look at the transformation, and you can see it is actually somewhat resemblant of Optimus Prime, and that's what makes them the Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. As I say, the series itself isn't very good. The acting in it is terrible. And for the westernized version, what the comedic element is the character of Miss Starkey. Her name was Miss Starkey, which is the school lunch lady. And then in season 2 of that show, the character of Amp is actually then replaced, because suddenly the actor, I think, left for unknown reasons. So one episode he was in the show, the next he wasn't, and that's actually a clip show of where the main characters look back over the experience they've had so far. And at the end, this new kid at school called Lucky walks in, and he's then the replacement character. Saying that really, it wasn't a good series. I think it is available to watch if you want to watch it, but also I've enjoyed watching it. I've watched pretty much both the series all the way through. Certainly not probably the weakest one of them by far. So now I've discussed the shows I know about. I have seen a few episodes of another adaptation of Kamen Rider called Kamen Rider Dragonite, but I really can't stand to watch any more of it, because it's a real insult to Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider Dragonite it was called, but I just cannot stand to watch any more of it. It's not for kids, it's more of an adult. This is the one Tokusatsu show I think I've seen that's mostly adult friendly, but I can't stand to watch any more of it because it was just so shit from what I saw. So now I'll just talk about why I like that stuff. Well, my interest in Tokusatsu just became just really from hearing about it, and hearing about, learning about, when I started to learn that the source material for a lot of things I liked as a kid originally came from Japan, and I became very keen to see what the original shows were. I started watching Kamen Rider, bits of Super Sentai, and I've been buying the Shout Factory releases of the Super Sentai shows for a couple of years now. And I watched Zyuranger all the way through, which is the series that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the original Power Rangers, was adapted from, and I just loved it. And I really loved how different it was. It was just a genius thing to see. And it filled in it answered a lot of questions for me that kind of were unanswered from Power Rangers as to why certain things didn't quite fit. But as I say, trying to mash up the Japanese footage with the original footage can be difficult, particularly when particularly since I think the show it's primarily set in is Tokyo in the original format, but then you try to set it in California in a westernized version. So yeah, like some things didn't make sense as to why there was Japanese writing on a lot of things you saw in shows like Power Rangers, but that was because they obviously little blips in post-production, probably that they couldn't do much about from the Japanese footage. And what I like about Tokusatsu is it has a similar feeling to anime. It's just the storylines, the characters really are unique in a lot of unique compared to a lot of other shows that I like. And that's the thing I like about Japanese culture, and how creative they are and how good they are at telling stories. I think they have a very unique vision of telling stories there, spreading their messages, spreading out positive messages. So I've grown to I love Kamen Rider. I love the characters. I love the action. I love all the vehicles and giant robots and scenes. I have watched a bit of the Japanese version of Spider-Man, which was a Tokusatsu series, which I think came between a deal between Stan Lee and a company in Japan to do a Japanese version of Spider-Man, which was quite good, and it was very different to Marvel's Spider-Man, to the character of Peter Parker, where this Spider-Man has some of the same characteristics, some of the same abilities as Peter Parker, but also had a giant robot, like a Megazord, which was called the Marveler. And that really is a good series. I must get back to watching it. So that is why I like it, just because it's a very, very unique, a very unique, sort of amazing form of entertainment, and most of the time they won't dub it because basically if you just attempt to dub to dub it with voiceover with English language, it really would look stupid because the lip syncing just isn't fitting. It really wouldn't fit. So watch it with subtitles. So I always watch any show that I've watched in Japanese. I've always watched with subtitles. Any live action show. And it's just and the toys, the collector's items that it comes with, and I think that some are good. I have got some Kamen Rider stuff because Bandai does. I think Bandai does is the toy line for Kamen Rider and Super Sentai in Japan, as well as there being for Power Rangers and the other shows here in the UK. But the Japanese figures and vehicles, I think, are far superior to the versions that we get here in the UK and in America. So and that is why I like the whole genre in general. Is just a great. It's just fun. It's kind of like a world you can get lost in. It reminds me a lot of video games, and the martial arts used is absolutely fantastic. It reminds me a lot, of say, of a video game. It kind of similar feeling to anime. It can take you to like a world. It really became a form of escaping for me. Watching Tokusatsu shows did. And I would recommend checking them out if you haven't seen any. If you're a fan of Power Rangers, or if you like any of the those shows we've talked about, I would recommend checking Sentai, Kamen Rider, or whatever the series may be out, because I think you'll really enjoy it. So yeah, so that's where I think we'll leave this video. I've really enjoyed doing it. It's been a long video. Anyways, I'll be back soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye.